past 2 years alone, the world has produced more data than ever before in the history of mankind. So think about this for a second. Right, to me, that is the key story to understand our times. In 2 years, more data than ever before in the history of mankind. So we're about to experience a data revolution, which is going to have a tremendously profound, lasting, and transformative impact on our lives and on our world. So let's take a step back and try to understand what's going on. Really, two things. The first one is we've invented this little thing, which is nothing short of a compass for this new world we're entering. So a little show of hands, maybe a quick show of hands. Who in the audience is sporting or carrying a smartphone? Oh, that's, that's impressive. In case you don't see it, pretty much everyone. And the good news is all of you carrying these smartphones actually walk around with, in your pockets, more than 30,000 times the computing power of the navigation systems that put Apollo 11 to the surface of the moon. Right? See the perspective here. This is a tremendous change. This is a brave new world we're entering. And it's not only you, it's not only us. There's today about 1 billion people on the surface of the planet connected through these devices, cell phones, smartphones, connected devices. We're creating an entire network around the world of sensors, of cameras, of microphones, of accelerometers, GPS chips. And all this is generating huge amounts of data which help us understand our lives and the world in a much better fashion. Now, the second thing that happened is in order to process and to manage these amount of data that were never seen before, we've had to invent new tools, new instruments. Right? So computer scientists have had to figure out how we can make thousands of computers work together to manage these tremendous sizes of data. They've had to develop new algorithms that use these new sources of information to try to extract relationships, try to learn insights from the data, try to peek into the future with predictive algorithms and machine learning. And what this amounts to is that we've created this new tool, this new instrument to try to understand the world. Right? So two things at the same time. One is we are all walking around with so much connectivity and with sensors that make us, that give us this tremendous ability to document the world. It's a huge scale of data. And the second one is we now know what to learn from this data. And this has changed in the past 10 years. No one even had a concept of those devices 10 years ago. And what does this mean for us? Well, it means that for the first time in the history of mankind, we can actually reveal the invisible. So let me give you an example. This map that you see here is not a map of the world, right? It looks like it, but it's not a geographical map. We know how important geography is, but this is not a map of geographical features. These lines that you see aren't undersea cables or flight paths. It's not any sort of physical reality. This map is the map of friendships on Facebook. So it might sound cute, right? But think about this just for a second. Have we ever been able, again in the history of the world, to document precisely, with such accuracy, the level of interconnectivity between people, between cities, between countries across the planet? I mean, this is an absolutely amazing feat of technology. This required data that did not even exist 10 years ago because Facebook was just created, right? Techniques that we didn't even invent because we never had to manage such amounts of data. And by the way, this is an incredible tribute to the vision of Senator Fulbright, right? Peace through shared understanding. This is a map of friendship around the world. So my whole point today is that data, sorry if the mic works, my whole point today is that data can change the world if technology helps us, right? And if we can make it work for us. So let's go on a journey to try to understand how these new phenomena are going to change our lives. Let's go and let's embark on one day in the life in the age of data. So we are a Fulbright crowd, so of course priority is straight. Let's start with education. Now, quick question: what's the most exciting thing to happen to have happened in education over the past 2 or 3 years? Any ideas? Any guesses? MOOCs massively open online courses, extremely exciting. It's the revolution of open access. Now, millions of people worldwide have access to the content of higher education. This is extremely interesting in terms of democratizing access to education. But to me, this story, though it's actually a major development, is not the most exciting things about MOOCs. One question, have any of you completed a class on one of these online platforms? Oh, that's quite impressive. 2 classes? 3 classes? Thank you. 3 classes in the back. Well, that's quite impressive. Now, the key to understand these platforms, for me, is not really that it gives access to so many people to education. That's, of course, a really important feature. But what's even more interesting is the fact that every single interaction on these platforms is recorded, it's logged, it's collected, it's analyzed, it's understood. So it means that we have millions of students taking thousands of online classes in hundreds of countries around the world, and everything is recorded. Think of this. This is a giant experiment in learning. What will we learn from these platforms will benefit everyone, because teachers will be able to improve, will fundamentally understand better how we learn. Second example, cities. I mean, cities, half of the world today lives in cities. They concentrate all the major issues that our world is facing. Traffic issues, environmental issues, sustainable issues, security issues. If we can use data to predict where we should send patrol beats, like Los Angeles is doing, or if we can predict where we should send a fire brigade before fire risks break out, like the city of New York is doing, of course we're going to live much better in our cities, and so we're going to help them scale up. And that's one of the ways we can solve the major challenges of our time. Another one, fashion. Love this one. So I'm not suggesting, despite what it may look like, that we all dress up like Lady Gaga, except instead of steaks, we take electronic circuits. But this is actually real. It's happening. Our garments, the very clothes we're wearing, one day will be connected. And it's already starting. So what's pictured here is an open hardware platform. It's something that allows you to program electronics, and it means the barriers to entry into prototyping real physical devices have fallen to an all-time low. And what this means is that suddenly we're able to create wearable devices in our garages and in our labs. And so we're starting to wear shirts that will tweet. We're starting to wear watches that will be able to measure my pulse as I'm talking, and maybe one day my blood pressure, and maybe one day my blood sugar as well. Now imagine what it would be if when I gobble this supersized Coca-Cola Coke, I see my blood sugar going up. I mean, this would be the most important development for public health and the fight against diabetes in years, right? Health, the essence of life. Health is about to be deeply and fundamentally disrupted by access to data, because for the first time, we will be able to understand our exact state of health and to personalize treatments and care to every one of us. The genome, the DNA, it took the Human Genome Project 15 years, 1986, 2001, 15 years, $3 billion of investment to sequence one genome. Today, it takes less than 24 hours, and we just crossed the $1,000 barrier in January. Right, so imagine every 5 months, the cost of sequencing one genome goes down by 50%. Imagine what this means for the next 10 years. What is going to happen once we all walk around with in our pockets the 800 megabytes of genomic information we all carry in our cells? Has any one of you been sequenced? Show of hands. Someone? One hand? See, we're living in the future. So this is happening, and that's what's really interesting is with all this data, we will be able to improve the outcomes of our health system in significant and major ways. Now, the takeaway from all these examples is that data is extremely powerful, right? Information is power, but with great powers come great responsibilities. And so what we have to understand is how these positive developments will be put in place without risking to undermine the very benefits we're trying to reap. Right? In an age of data, can we still expect privacy? When everyone is walking around with a glass that's connected, a connected glass, can we actually think of privacy in the same way as before? What happens when we're all flying drones over the country? What happens when we all have the sequence of our genome? Should we be able to give it to our insurer, for example? Or should we make sure that there's always some sort of a barrier here? These choices are absolutely fundamental to the world that we will leave to our children. And so my major takeaway and my major point here is that if we want to make data work for us, then we have to set these rules right. We have, in essence, to build a data democracy. So I don't have answers to these questions. I think no one has them. At this point, the key is to ask the right questions. We're very much in the same position as the French philosopher Tocqueville was when he came to America to study democracy in America in the early 19th century to try to chart a path, right, for the peoples of Europe. And we have to try to understand, what does this mean? What does this new age of data mean for all of us, for the choices, the collective choices we have to make? So how we adapt our institutions to this new reality is a fascinating challenge. And I speak here on my behalf, of course, but for the past 3 years now, I've had the tremendous privilege to be working on the French Prime Minister's Open Data Task Force under 3 successive governments. And we've built a team that has exactly this mission. How do we make sure that the data the government collects, that should be accessible to everyone under the equivalent of a freedom of information regulation, actually gets in the hand of the people? So we've built the website you see here, the data.gouv.fr platform. It's accessible to everyone. We've worked with all the different departments in the French government to make sure that all the data sets that could be of interest to citizens, to data scientists, to journalists, to innovators were accessible, were downloadable in open, reusable formats. And more than this, we've engaged with more than 100 startups in France, around the world, to try to make sure that the data sets we release are actually of use and that something can be built out of it, be it for health, for transportation, for public services in general. And this is very much one of the ways government can transform itself in the age of data. What we've tried to build here is a platform. So we provide the resources for innovators to come and build things that make everyone's lives better thanks to these resources. So to finish, I'd like to share 3 of the lessons I've personally taken away from this experience of living on the fault line, I guess, between the new world that's emerging and this older, more traditional world that's trying to evolve. The first one is that transparency and privacy are absolute cornerstones of our times, right? Of course, the question of what they will mean when we have so much data at our fingertips that we can't even comprehend it is probably going to look very different from what it looks today. But the ideals of 1776 or 1789 or the Declaration of Human Rights are still even more important today that we're entering this new world, which we don't know yet. The second one is regulation and innovation. There's a very strong debate in many countries in the world, and it's true in France as well, that tends to oppose proponents of a precautionary principle and proponents of innovation. And one of the arguments is, well, you're trying to build this new world, but we don't know how it's going to work. We don't know if it's going to be fair. We don't know who wins and who loses, so you shouldn't be able to innovate. Well, the key phenomenon here is that the world's change is actually accelerating. Think about this, every 2 years, more data than ever before. So how can we imagine how the world is going to look like in 10 years? There's just no way to do it. 10 years ago, no one thought of these cell phones we talked about. And so the key here is, and that's my opinion, but I think it's something we need to share, we need to talk about, the precautionary principle should actually be that you should always experiment with innovation so you can understand it. Always experiment before you regulate. And that's the only way we can understand the world that's coming and that we can protect consumers, citizens, and our daily lives. And the third lesson and the final one is pyramids have to work like networks. Pyramids like networks. Now, what do I mean? Well, what you see on this picture is the pyramid from Le Louvre, right? So it's, in a way, the embodiment of this clash between modernity and this traditional place of power, which used to be the palace of the French kings. And of course, sometimes we tend to pit and oppose the traditional structures that run public services and have a very long and lasting culture that has shaped them and made it reflect our values. And on the other hand, we tend to see those new services, those new technologies, new developments as something that creates fear, that's sometimes very drastically changing the world as we've known it. And specifically, we can tend to think of examples such as what does Wikipedia has meant for those who held knowledge? What today would OpenStreetMap mean for people who have been making maps of countries for those past centuries? So one of the examples here of networks and pyramids is this really interesting development that happened in France, where the National Geographic Institute, which is a public sector body that was actually created under Napoleon to map the victories of the Great Army, has started to work with this organization, this community called OpenStreetMap. Now, OpenStreetMap is a Wikipedia of maps. It means you and I can participate, and we can help map the entire world. Now, it may sound quite risky, right? Because anyone can access the map, so anyone can change it. And if I can say that the street in front of my house is actually non-existent, well, who's going to come and check? And that's the key story here. It turns out people care. It turns out there's a vibrant community of people who check every single edit, who make sure that the map that's being constructed by this community of thousands and thousands of people around the world is the closest thing we have to the actual physical reality of the world. Now, of course, you have to trust this community. And so, of course, for a public sector body, it's something that's difficult and it's something that's not natural. But it turns out that the ability to edit the map is what makes it useful. It turns out now that firefighters in France, first responders are using those maps because whenever there's a problem on the road, they can map it right away. So it becomes a key feature of a public service to be trusted by this community. So I'll leave you with this, but to me this is a very hopeful message. Pyramids and networks can work together. And it's in a way the key to what we have to do to face the challenges of this new age of data. So I couldn't conclude without saying a word on how similar the challenges that Senator Fulbright was facing when he created the program that brings us here today. Right? Creating peace through shared understanding. Well, to me, this is exactly what we need to do in order to make sure that the structures of our government, our institutions, our culture, our value that have been shaped by hundreds of years of history in Europe, in the US, around the world, in India and in China, actually reflect our deepest beliefs and values in this new age of data. So I'll leave you with this. Dare to think of how we can make sure data works for us, and dare to act so we build the future together. Thank you very much.